"Mr. Coleman," she said, her voice tight, "if you continue these interruptions, I will charge you with contempt of court. The witness is describing his observation. That is permitted." "Even if the observation is a guess," I shot back before I could stop myself. Her eyes narrowed like knives. "You're testing this court's patience." I didn't move, didn't flinch. I stepped back, but I didn't back down. And in that moment, I knew. She wasn't just trying to control the trial. She was trying to break me. But this time, I wasn't here to survive her courtroom. I was here to dismantle it. Have you ever been judged, discriminated against, or had your dignity and self-worth completely crushed by someone abusing their power? Let me tell you my story, the battles I've fought for my clients, and the deep injustice they've endured at the hands of a system that's broken to its core. If you've ever experienced anything like that, even just once, leave the number 9 in the comments so I know you're here and ready to hear what I have to share. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you won't miss any of the intense moments coming up. If you're deaf or have trouble seeing, please turn on the subtitles. We created them especially for you, because you matter. This is Radio from Hine, the #1 YouTube channel for justice and equality for all, standing strong against racism and injustice. Wishing you a peaceful day. They say some rooms remember, the walls absorb the whispers, the verdicts, the unspoken threats. And let me tell you, Franklin County Courthouse in Greensboro, North Carolina didn't just remember. It suffocated. It wasn't the heat that hit me when I stepped inside. It was the silence. A loaded kind of stillness. The kind that made your skin itch and your breath catch. The kind that told you this place had rules that weren't written anywhere. I had stood in this courtroom before. Not as often as others and not by choice, but every time I did, I felt it. The grip of something heavy. Something invisible, but no less real. At the center of it all sat Judge Frances Delaney. Her reputation had long stopped being a rumor and become a warning. 23 years on the bench, and she ruled her courtroom like a monarch. Sharp-eyed, sharp-tongued, and sharp enough to slice through your soul without ever raising her voice. They called her the Ice Widow behind closed doors. Not because she'd ever lost a husband, but because everything warm, everything human, seemed to have been drained from her decades ago. Delaney didn't yell. She didn't need to. Her glare could crush you before you opened your mouth. Her judgments came fast and hard, especially if you were black, poor, or foolish enough to talk back. Or worse, if you were like me, a black man with a bar license and a reputation for not knowing his place. Attorneys knew what to expect. A motion to suppress? Denied. An objection during prosecution's cross? Overruled. A request for recess? Laughed out of the room. The only thing consistent about Frances Delaney was that she was consistently biased, and everyone knew it. But no one said it. Not out loud, not on the record. Because in Franklin County, judges were gods and she was Olympus. I walked in that morning with one goal, to make sure that ended today. My client, Javon Harris, was already sitting at the defense table when I arrived. A 29-year-old warehouse worker, father of 2, accused of robbing a gas station at gunpoint, a station that had no working security cameras, a witness who wasn't sure, and a DA looking to make headlines. The case had Delaney written all over it. As I passed the gallery, I noticed the same familiar faces, court reporters, overworked clerks, a couple of bailiffs who'd been here too long. They barely glanced at me, but I saw the shift, the quick exchange of looks, the silent sighs. They knew who I was. They also knew how this would probably end. But I wasn't here to win a verdict. I was here to break a pattern. Delaney entered exactly at 9 a.m., black robes flowing, glasses perched low on her nose, that trademark expression of disdain already settling in. She didn't look at me when she sat down. Not yet. But I knew she felt me there, like a stone in her shoe. "Mr. Coleman," she said, not bothering to raise her head, "I expect you to keep your theatrics to a minimum this morning. My docket is full." There it was. The ice. I nodded slowly. "As always, Your Honor," I said. She didn't smile. She never did. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not again. Not after what happened last time. Not after I swore I'd never set foot in Frances Delaney's courtroom again unless it was to bury her rulings in an appeal. But here I was. 3 years ago, I stood in the same chamber defending a 17-year-old named Aaliyah Benton, a grocery store cashier wrongfully accused of credit card fraud by a manager who didn't like how she wore her hair. Delaney shredded her to pieces, overruled every objection like it was scripted, glared down my arguments like they were personal insults, and in the end, sentenced Aaliyah to a probation term that derailed her life before it even started. The girl left sobbing, and I left with a vow tucked deep in my chest. I'll be back, and next time, I won't leave empty-handed. This wasn't revenge. It was repair. I walked to the defense table like I was stepping onto sacred ground, scarred, battered, and still reeking of injustice. Javon Harris sat hunched beside his empty chair, hands folded, eyes low. 30 years old, forklift operator, father of 2. The kind of black man society likes to call dangerous because he doesn't smile enough in convenience stores. "You good?" I murmured as I set down my files. He nodded once. "Just want to get through this, man." I heard the fatigue in his voice, the disbelief that we even had to be here for something this flimsy. A shaky witness, no weapon recovered, no surveillance footage, and a DA team so desperate for wins they'd sell hot air as evidence. But none of that mattered, not with Judge Delaney on the bench. Across the courtroom, Sean Gallagher adjusted his jacket like a pageant contestant. Clean-shaven, hair perfectly styled, not a wrinkle on his suit. I'd seen his type before, young, hungry, full of the kind of arrogance only law school and family money could teach. He was smiling to himself, like he thought this was already won. And maybe it was, if this were any other defendant and any other defense attorney. Gallagher was barely 5 years out of Duke Law, and someone up top had handed him a high-profile armed robbery case on a silver platter. That told me 3 things. He was ambitious, he was naive, and he was being used. No senior prosecutor would touch this case with Delaney presiding unless they wanted the blood on their hands. But Gallagher, he thought he was walking into a slam dunk. He didn't see the cracks forming in the courtroom walls. Not yet. Delaney sat high above, black robe immaculate, gavel perfectly centered. She scanned the room like a queen disinterested in her own subjects. "The state may proceed," she said curtly. Gallagher rose, brimming with synthetic confidence. "Your Honor, the state is prepared to demonstrate that Mr. Javon Harris entered Quick Go Gas on April 3rd with the clear intent to commit armed robbery, using a firearm to intimidate the store clerk and absconding with over $200 in cash and merchandise." I'd already stopped listening. I knew the script. His argument was stitched together from questionable assumptions. One witness whose vision was compromised in a car crash half a decade ago, and no physical evidence. Not a single print, not a single frame of video, not even a proper lineup ID. But with Delaney, that didn't matter. She didn't care about truth. She cared about control. I flipped open my legal pad and made a show of jotting notes. I didn't need to write a thing. This was muscle memory. I wanted the jury to see I was composed, calculating, unshaken. That I belonged here. Midway through his opening, Delaney's voice cracked through the air like frost on glass. "Mr. Gallagher, I suggest you curb the dramatics. This courtroom values clarity over theatrics." He stumbled for half a second. "Yes, Your Honor." I didn't smile, but inside something shifted. Let her bark at him for once. Gallagher finished up, slightly rattled, and returned to his seat like a deflated balloon. The smugness had dulled. The chill was starting to reach him too. Delaney turned her gaze on me for the first time, her eyes sharp enough to cut. "Mr. Coleman, proceed with your opening." I stood with deliberate pace, took one breath, then another. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," I said, voice steady, "you're about to hear a story. A story stitched together with guesses, assumptions, and a great deal of imagination. What you won't hear, what you deserve to hear, is actual proof, because it doesn't exist." I let the words hang, let them settle in the room like truth often does. Slow, heavy, undeniable. And no matter how loud the prosecution gets, no matter how hard this courtroom leans one way or the other, I said, eyes locking briefly with Delaney's, we cannot convict a man based on nothing. The absence of evidence is not the presence of guilt. Her face didn't move, but I saw it, the twitch in her jaw. I knew what was coming before I said a word. Judge Delaney didn't like to be challenged, especially not by me. Not by someone who didn't play the game the way she liked it. Someone who didn't bow. The moment I finished my opening, she leaned forward just enough to make the courtroom feel smaller. "Mr. Coleman," she said, voice calm but dripping with disdain, "if you intend to turn this trial into a personal performance, I suggest you reconsider. My courtroom has no tolerance for theatrics." I met her gaze, unblinking. "With respect, Your Honor," I said, "this isn't theater. This is a man's life." She blinked once. That was all. But in that blink, I saw it. That old fury she kept wrapped in poise. She didn't need to raise her voice. The pressure in the room dropped all on its own. The air felt thinner. "Mr. Coleman," she said, her tone like steel, "push one step further, and you will answer to this court in a way you won't forget." The tension in the room thickened like fog. Nobody moved. The prosecution called their first witness, a gas station clerk named Brett Kessler, somewhere in his 60s, white, nervous as hell. He fidgeted in the witness chair like he wanted to disappear. Gallagher approached him like a high school debate champion trying to land his first trophy. "Mr. Kessler, can you identify the man you saw on the night of April 3rd? Kessler glanced around, then pointed hesitantly at Javon. I think that's him." I stood immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. That's not a definitive identification." Delaney didn't even wait. Overruled. I turned slightly toward the jury, not dramatically, but just enough. They needed to see it too. Gallagher continued. "And what did this man do when he entered the store?" He walked in fast, didn't say anything, looked nervous. "Did he have a weapon?" Kessler hesitated. I thought he did. Maybe. He had his hand in his pocket. That was it." I rose again. "Objection. Speculation." Delaney sighed, loudly. "Mr. Coleman," she said, "if you continue these interruptions, I will charge you with contempt of court. The witness is describing his observation. That is permitted." "Even if the observation is a guess?" I said sharply before I could stop myself. Her eyes narrowed. "You're testing this court's patience." I stepped back, but not out. Across from me, Gallagher looked smug. Javon looked like he was made of stone. No movement, no expression. But I knew the burn happening inside him, the familiar sting of being judged without being heard. I could feel the tension wrapping around the jury box like a slow-moving vine. One juror, a black woman in her 40s, shifted in her seat. Another, a younger white man, looked down like he didn't want to be part of what was happening. But Delaney didn't care. She pressed forward. "Defense may proceed with cross-examination," she said, barely glancing in my direction. I stood and walked to the witness stand. "Mr. Kessler," I said gently, "when you say you think you saw my client, what makes you unsure?" Kessler shifted. It was dark, and I only saw him for a second. "You said he had his hand in his pocket. Did you actually see a weapon?" "No, but it looked suspicious." "Suspicious how?" "I don't know. Just the way he moved." "And you reported all of this after the fact, correct?" "Yes." I turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the defense moves to strike the identification as unreliable." Delaney didn't even look up. Denied. And the suggestion of a weapon? Also denied. I took a breath, turned back to Kessler. No further questions. As I walked back, Delaney's voice followed. "Mr. Coleman," she said, "this is not your classroom. Do not lecture the witness." "I wasn't," I replied calmly. "I was clarifying." "Final warning," she snapped. The gallery fell into a frozen hush. Even the court reporter hesitated, pen mid-air. I didn't need to look around to know everyone had stopped breathing for a second. And in that stillness, something shifted. This wasn't just about Javon anymore. This was about power, about a judge who had ruled for too long without being questioned, and a man, me, who had decided that silence would no longer be an option. They say every trial turns on a moment. Not always a headline moment. Sometimes it's subtle. A glance, a hesitation, a question that never should have been answered, or one that never got asked. Today, it turned on the silence. After I returned to my seat, Judge Delaney called the next witness, a young patrol officer named Nathan Ellis. He was clean-cut, barely 30, wearing his uniform like a second skin, and his loyalty like a badge of pride. Gallagher led the direct. "Officer Ellis, when you arrived on scene, what did you see?" Ellis straightened. "We saw the suspect running from the gas station. He matched the description called in by dispatch. Black male, dark hoodie, jeans. He refused to stop. We pursued. I took notes without looking up. That description again. Always vague, always convenient. Convenient enough to stop just about any black man within a 3-block radius and call it probable cause." "And did you recover a weapon?" Gallagher asked. "No, sir. We searched the area. Nothing found." That made the jury blink. Even Delaney sat a little straighter. Gallagher stammered, "But, you still believed he was armed?" "Yes, based on his behavior." I rose. "Objection. That's speculation." Delaney's gavel hit once, hard, sustained. That was new. A flicker, small but real. Gallagher pivoted. Did the suspect resist? Verbally. He cursed, questioned the arrest. I leaned forward. Was he violent? No. Did he run? Yes. Was he holding anything? No. Silence. I stood. Permission to approach. Delaney nodded. I stepped to the witness stand. Officer Ellis, I said, you said the suspect matched a general description? Yes. Would you agree that hundreds of black men in Greensboro could fit that description on any given night? He hesitated. Possibly. Did you conduct a lineup? No. Did you find fingerprints, surveillance, DNA? No. Did you file a full report that night? He hesitated again. No. It was filed the next morning. Why the delay? We were instructed to wait. I paused. The room tightened. Instructed by whom? Ellis glanced at Gallagher. Gallagher sprang up. Objection. Relevance. Overruled, Delaney said. That changed the air. Instructed by whom? I repeated lower now. Ellis swallowed. Detective Sarah Moffat. Gallagher's direct supervisor? A long, stretched silence followed. You could hear fabric shift on the gallery benches. I didn't need to say it. I let it hang. Something was off, and they knew it. I walked back slowly, letting the weight of those words sink. Then I turned. Your Honor, I said, the defense has serious concerns about the integrity of the arrest and the chain of custody. Delaney sat still, jaw tight, noted, proceed. But we were already beyond that. I glanced toward the gallery. Melinda Chase, Charlotte Daly, was writing with her head down, brow furrowed. She was no longer documenting a trial. She was documenting something unraveling. Gallagher tried to steady the ship. He called the store's assistant manager. But the man couldn't keep his own facts straight. Times were wrong. Details slipped. His nerves betrayed him. When I stood to cross-examine, he looked like he wanted to disappear. Did you see my client take anything? No. Did he speak to you? No. Did you identify him at the scene? No. So how exactly are you testifying that he was the one who robbed the store? The man blinked, then muttered, I assumed. Thank you, I said. No further questions. I turned to the jury. And this time, they weren't looking through me. They were with me. Something was shifting behind their eyes. A crack, a fracture, maybe even understanding. And I felt it. That moment. It wasn't explosive. It didn't need to be. It was quiet, almost gentle. But it was the moment the room changed shape. It was the moment doubt took hold. Not just of the witnesses or the story, but of her. Delaney. The unraveling had begun, and I wasn't going to stop it. By the time I stepped back from the last witness, the room had changed. It wasn't obvious. Delaney still wore that same deadpan mask. Gallagher still clung to his folder like it had answers, but the energy had shifted. The jury's body language no longer mirrored boredom or routine. They were leaning in. They were curious. They were unsure. And that was dangerous, because uncertainty in a courtroom like this is a crack in the wall, and I was about to widen it. There's a certain silence that falls over a courtroom, not when things calm down, but right before they explode. The kind of stillness that makes your skin itch, like the air itself is bracing for impact. That's where we were. I stood slowly and adjusted my jacket, walking to the center of the courtroom like I'd been waiting 10 years for this exact step. Maybe I had. Your Honor, I said, the defense requests to reintroduce Exhibit 12. Delaney raised a brow. The surveillance timeline? Yes, I said, alongside 2 supplemental documents we just authenticated this morning. Gallagher was already on his feet. Objection. This wasn't submitted. I turned without breaking rhythm. Your Honor, these were received through a public records request and matched the state's own chain of custody. We're not introducing new evidence. We're correcting the state's timeline. Delaney studied me, then flatly. Proceed. I nodded at my assistant, who dimmed the lights. The screen lit up with a grainy image from the convenience store security footage. Timestamp, 9:43 p.m. This, I said, is the exact moment the store alarm was triggered, according to both the store manager and the police report. Click. Next slide, the dispatch log. Timestamp, 9:47 p.m. Officers arrive on scene. Click. Next slide, the arrest report. According to this, I continued, my client was taken into custody at 9:52 p.m., just 5 minutes after officers arrived. I turned slowly to the jury. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Click. Final slide. A traffic cam still, different location, different angle, captured at 9:44 p.m. A young black man, hoodie and jeans, walking calmly 5 blocks away from the store. You don't need facial recognition, I said, because the timestamp proves this. Whoever that is, he couldn't have been in the store at 9:43. Delaney's fingers curled slightly against her bench. Your Honor, Gallagher barked. This could be anyone? And it could be, I said, lowering my voice. But what matters isn't just who. It's where and when. I picked up the police log from the evidence table. The arresting officer, Officer Nathan Ellis, wrote in his notes that they pursued the suspect from the corner of Miller and 11th. I let that sentence sit. It hung in the air like smoke. Miller and 11th is 6 blocks north of the store. So tell me, how does someone rob a convenience store at 9:43 and a minute later show up calmly walking 6 blocks away on a traffic cam? I looked back to the jury. No one moved. Gallagher cleared his throat. We don't have a confirmed time on the incident. You do, I said, because the alarm system logs it to the second, and because your own police report confirms it. There is no ambiguity here. A reporter in the back of the room stood quietly and started recording on her phone. Another scribbled faster than his hand could move. I walked a few steps closer to the jury. You were told this case was open and shut, slam dunk, but it's coming apart, and not because of a loophole, not because of some clever defense play. I held up the arrest report. It's unraveling because the truth doesn't bend to the story, because the numbers, the timestamps, the facts, they contradict the prosecution's version, and they do it loudly. Delaney's face didn't flinch, but her eyes did. She saw what was happening. This wasn't about Javon anymore. This was about her courtroom slipping out of her grip. I turned slowly. Your Honor, I said, evenly, at this point, the defense submits that the timeline offered by the state is not only unreliable, but deeply misleading. What are you asking the court to consider, she asked, her voice flat, but forced. I stepped forward. I'm asking this court to consider, I said, that this man, Javon Harris, was not arrested because he matched a description or because the evidence led there. He was arrested because someone needed a headline, because someone needed to close a case. I paused, then added, because this system too often trades certainty for speed, justice for closure. There was a murmur in the gallery, a ripple in the quiet. It wasn't shock. It was recognition. Delaney didn't answer, but I saw her lips pressed together, her fingers tapped twice against the bench. Her grip was slipping. Delaney didn't say a word, not after I tore through their timeline, not after I laid the facts bare on the floor like a crime scene. Her silence wasn't strength, it was stalling. Gallagher sat like he was glued to his chair, flipping pages that meant nothing now. The jury? Frozen. Even the air in the room had stopped moving. That's when it happened. The doors slammed open. Not a creak, not a knock. A bang, loud enough to make half the gallery jump. 2 men in dark suits stormed in, one tall, square-jawed, the other lean, eyes sharp like glass. They didn't walk, they advanced. No hesitation, no confusion. The taller one flashed his badge. Federal agents, he barked. This courtroom is now under federal jurisdiction. A ripple shot through the room. Delaney's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? The second agent, already reaching into a thick folder, answered. We're here to execute a warrant. Gallagher stood, confused and trembling. A warrant? For what? Neither agent looked at him. Judge Francis Delaney, the tall one said, locking eyes with the bench. You are under investigation for obstruction of justice, judicial misconduct, bribery, and civil rights violations. Gasps erupted across the room like gunshots. Phones went up. Reporters started whispering so fast it sounded like static. Delaney's face went stone white. You're mistaken, she hissed, but her voice had already lost its weight. The second agent pulled out the document and held it high. This warrant was signed by the United States District Court for the Eastern District of North Carolina, he said. You are ordered to cease all judicial activity effective immediately. Silence. A pause so loud it rang. The jury was no longer watching the lawyers. They were watching her. Like something mythical had cracked wide open in front of them. Delaney gripped the bench harder. Her knuckles had gone pale. This is outrageous, she growled. You cannot just march in here and... We just did, said Agent 1 without blinking. I demand to speak with the chief judge. That will happen, Agent 2 replied calmly. After you're processed. You could feel the sound in the room change. No longer words, just gasps. Chairs shifting, pens frozen in midair. It was the kind of moment people feel before they remember it. A juror covered her mouth. Another muttered, "Holy hell." Even Gallagher looked like he'd been hit with a pipe. Delaney turned to the bailiff, but he didn't move. His face blank, hands at his side. like someone had just unplugged his will. The agents moved forward, slow, deliberate. Every step like a countdown. "This is still my courtroom," Delaney snapped, voice cracking. "I haven't been relieved of duty." "You just were," Agent 1 said. He handed the document to the clerk. His voice dropped lower. "Section 242, multiple counts, federal violations. You no longer have authority here." Delaney looked around the room, but it had turned against her. The reporters were already broadcasting her name like wildfire. Every camera lens felt like a spotlight pointed at her throat. And me? I hadn't moved. I didn't blink, didn't smirk. I sat still and let it all unfold. Because this wasn't personal. This was accountability. Delaney finally looked down at the paper in front of her. Her jaw clenched. Her eyes blinked once, slow. Her fingers hovered like she didn't know whether to push back or faint. She looked at the agents. And for the first time since I entered that courtroom, I saw it. Fear. Not rage. Not power. Just fear. Agent 2 stepped forward, reading aloud again. "By order of the federal court, you are instructed to remain seated pending your transfer for formal charges and interrogation." Delaney didn't respond. The room didn't breathe. I glanced at Javon. He didn't move either. His lips parted slightly, stunned, like he'd been underwater this whole time and finally broke the surface. But the cuffs were still on his wrists, and the woman who put them there was now staring down her own judgment. But not yet. Not completely. There were no cuffs on her yet. No escort. Just silence. And we all waited for the gavel to fall. She didn't resist. When the cuffs finally clicked around her wrists, there was no protest, no last-ditch plea, no screaming, just silence. Judge Francis Delaney stood motionless as the 2 federal agents stepped to her sides, one on each arm like they had rehearsed this exact choreography. You could hear the breath catch in every corner of the room. The only sound was the faint hum of overhead lights and the distant shuffle of reporters leaning forward in their seats. She was still wearing her robe, still behind the bench, but all the power had vanished. It was like watching the voltage drop in a building before the blackout. The seal of the court behind her, the one etched in gold and mounted above her chair, looked hollow now, ornamental, a crest that no longer held meaning. And yet, Delaney held her chin high. Was it dignity? Was it pride? Or was it simply the last mask of someone who had spent her entire life learning how to keep her face unreadable? Then it happened. Her eyes found mine. For a moment, time didn't move. No one spoke. The jury didn't shuffle. The gallery held its breath. Her eyes locked onto mine. Not with hatred, not with defiance, but with something more difficult to define. Recognition. Not of me personally, but of the fact that someone like me was still standing while she was about to be removed. A reversal too sharp for her spine to adjust. I didn't blink, didn't smirk, didn't flinch. I let her see what she needed to see, because in that moment, Judge Francis Delaney was not a symbol, not a robe, not the gatekeeper of law and order. She was just another defendant. The agents began to move her, slowly, purposefully. Each step was exaggerated by silence, the metallic click of the cuffs, the soft drag of her robe over tile, the uneven rhythm of her breath. A procession with no music, just the sound of power collapsing. Delaney passed the jury box, where the jurors, who had once braced under her glares, now watched with disbelief. She passed the gallery, phones raised, journalists scribbling, people whispering. One woman clutched her pearls, muttering, "This can't be real." Then, in the far right corner of the courtroom, someone stood. It was Calvin Rhodes, a defense attorney from the old school, always carried a fraying leather briefcase, wore that same navy blue tie, crooked more often than not. We had crossed paths for years, but I hadn't seen him come in today. 5 years ago, he had stood in this very courtroom, arguing a case no one else wanted, and Delaney had butchered him in front of everyone, tossed out exculpatory evidence like it was trash, laughed at his objections, humiliated him until he could barely finish his closing statement. His client? Convicted. Appeal overturned the verdict years later, but Rhodes never recovered his courtroom confidence. Now, as Delaney passed, Rhodes didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes said it all, brimming, not with vengeance, but with something quieter, relief, closure. He didn't look at her. He looked at me. A silent message passed between us. Not well done, but thank you for seeing it through, for staying the course when others would have walked away, for proving that justice, even delayed, was still possible. Delaney reached the courtroom doors, and she hesitated, just for a breath. Maybe it was muscle memory. How many times had she sat in judgment as people walked that same path, through those same doors, wrists shackled, dignity shattered? But today, it was her turn. The agent on her left placed a hand gently on her shoulder. The double doors opened, and light spilled in. Not warm light, cold, surgical. The kind of light that doesn't illuminate, it exposes. Delaney stepped forward, and then she was gone. Vanished behind the very doors through which she had sent so many others. Doors that once swung only for the damned, now swung for her. There was no applause, no cheers, only a long, collective exhale. The kind that comes after a thunderstorm breaks the back of the heat. I sat still, eyes forward, heart steady, because this wasn't victory. It wasn't celebration. It was reckoning. The slow, grinding gears of justice had finally turned against one of their own, and for once, the machinery hadn't protected the architect. It had exposed her. The courtroom remained silent for nearly 1 minute after she left. The kind of silence that's never empty. It's filled with tension, disbelief, awe, and somewhere deep within it, hope. Hope that maybe this wasn't just a moment. Maybe it was the beginning of a shift. Maybe the robe wouldn't protect the corrupt forever. Maybe tomorrow would be different because today someone said, enough. The doors closed behind her. And just like that, Delaney was gone. The silence that followed wasn't relief. It was vacuum. As if her presence had taken all the oxygen out of the room, and now that she was gone, we were all learning how to breathe again. The judge's bench sat empty. No one moved. Not the jury, not Gallagher, not even Javon. We were waiting, not for instructions, but for someone, anyone, to restore order. And not just order in a procedural sense. We needed emotional gravity, someone to recenter this room that had just witnessed the legal equivalent of a lightning strike. It didn't take long. A side door opened behind the bench, and a man entered. Mid-60s, clean cut, gray suit, thick glasses. He walked with the confidence of someone who didn't need to assert himself, because his presence already did. His steps were steady, unhurried, each one landing like a punctuation mark. I recognized him immediately, Judge Alton Briggs, senior judge in the circuit, known for being fair, precise, and allergic to theatrics. The kind of judge who didn't tolerate soapbox speeches or performative objections. When he sat, the room knew it was back in the hands of law. He took the bench like he'd been sitting there all day. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, calm but commanding, "I've been called in to preside over the remainder of this proceeding due to the unexpected disruption." That might have been the understatement of the century. A murmur rippled through the gallery, but quickly died out under the weight of his tone. His eyes scanned the courtroom. Then he looked directly at me. "Mr. Coleman," he said, "do you have a motion to present?" I rose slowly, adjusted my tie. Every eye in the room followed. Even Javon straightened beside me, still unsure if he was allowed to hope. "Yes, Your Honor. I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against my client, Javon Harris." Briggs nodded. "On what grounds?" I stepped forward. On the grounds that the presiding judge, now removed under federal charges, oversaw this entire case with documented bias. From jury selection to evidentiary rulings to denying my Brady motions. The integrity of this trial is compromised beyond repair. Gallagher stood. "Objection," he barked. "That's an overreach. The charges are still valid. We have a witness." "No," I said firmly, cutting him off. Briggs raised an eyebrow. I turned back toward him. "Permission to elaborate?" He nodded once. I turned to the jury, what was left of them, and then back to the bench. "Your Honor, the prosecution's only eyewitness offered a statement of uncertainty. The video surveillance was incomplete. The alleged weapon was never recovered. And the judge, who was supposed to ensure a fair trial, actively suppressed evidence that would have exonerated my client." I let the weight settle before continuing. The words didn't need volume. They needed weight. Every aspect of this trial has been tainted. Continuing it would not only waste judicial resources, it would violate the very foundation of due process. Briggs leaned back in his chair. The entire courtroom watched him. Everyone held still, as though afraid that even breathing too loud would disrupt this fragile moment. Gallagher tried again. "Your Honor, we have precedent for continuing under substitution of judge. The charges themselves still hold." "Then let's talk about those charges," I said, turning to him. "What do you really have, Sean? A shaky ID and a prosecution built on a judge's bias?" Tell the court, with Delaney gone, do you still believe this case would survive scrutiny? Gallagher opened his mouth, then closed it. His silence said everything. Even the jury seemed to notice the tremble in his fingers as he gripped his notes. Briggs folded his hands, took a deep breath. The entire courtroom leaned in. You could feel it, an invisible pull toward whatever truth was about to land. Mr. Gallagher, Briggs said, do you wish to proceed with the case? Gallagher looked around, his jaw tensed. He stared at his notes as if they might rescue him, but rescue wasn't coming. No, Your Honor, he said finally. The state withdraws its prosecution. I didn't react. Neither did Javon. Not yet. We'd both learned that justice rarely arrived in a clean package, that even when it did, it still felt surreal, like reaching for something your whole life and finally grabbing hold but needing time to believe it. Briggs turned to the court reporter. Let the record show that all charges against Javon Harris are dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Harris is to be released immediately. The words rang louder than a gavel. Javon turned to me slowly, his eyes wide, like he didn't believe it yet. His wrists were still cuffed. The weight of months, years, hadn't fully lifted. Is that it? He whispered. I nodded. That's it. And just like that, justice, long withheld, was finally delivered. But it didn't arrive on a silver platter. It arrived in silence, in the wake of a fall, in the shadow of everything that should have never happened in the first place. The moment the judge's words settled, Mr. Harris is to be released immediately, there was no reaction. Not at first. No cheers, no gasps. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm, thick with the knowledge that everything has changed, but no one knows what comes next. The tension didn't dissolve. It shifted, became heavier in a new way. Javon and I just sat there for a second, still, absorbing. The courtroom, still echoing from the judgment, now waited on the next move. And that came in the form of a single, deliberate step. He moved slowly, as if realizing the weight of what he was about to do. Maybe he'd cuffed Javon before. Maybe he'd watched him walk in this courtroom day after day like a shadow no one wanted to see. Now, he reached down, clicked open the restraints, and pulled the cuffs free. They made a sharp, metallic sound, tiny almost, but it echoed like thunder inside that room. Javon looked down at his wrists. He didn't move, didn't flex, just stared, like he was waiting for the cuffs to snap back on. Javon, I said quietly, you're free. He turned to me slowly. His lips parted, but no words came out. His shoulders were still tight, his back still slightly hunched. It would take more than a legal ruling to undo months, years of damage. But it was a start. Across the aisle, Sean Gallagher looked like he had just aged a decade. His tie was crooked, his notes scattered like a fallen house of cards. He sat down heavily, no longer the eager prosecutor, just a man who had lost his shield and finally saw himself without it. He didn't look at me, didn't look at Javon. His eyes stayed fixed on the desk in front of him. I didn't feel satisfaction. Not yet. Because the courtroom had returned to quiet, but the cost of what had just happened was still rippling through every soul inside it. Javon rubbed his wrists. The marks were faint, but they were there, red outlines of accusation, of months in county holding, of court dates postponed, of being reduced to a docket number instead of a human being. He looked toward the jury. Most couldn't meet his eyes. I saw the way he stood, still unsure whether the ground beneath him was real. Still wearing the posture of a man conditioned not to make sudden moves, not to breathe too deep, not to speak unless spoken to. But then he straightened. Just a little. Enough for it to matter. His chin lifted, his shoulders pulled back. The man who had walked into that courtroom a ghost was now visible, solid, alive. I stepped closer, my voice quiet. You did it. No, he said softly, voice cracking. You did. I wanted to argue, tell him that his courage mattered, that his patience, his faith, his refusal to break, that was the reason we'd made it this far. But I didn't. I just nodded. Because I knew that right now, Javon wasn't ready to celebrate. He was free, but freedom doesn't always feel like release. Sometimes it feels like standing in the middle of a storm after the lightning has stopped, wondering if it's really over. And maybe that's what justice feels like at first. Not joy, not victory, just disbelief. When we stepped outside the courthouse, the air hit different. Not fresher, just louder. A wall of cameras and microphones met us like a firing squad, blinding lights, questions layered over questions, bodies jockeying for space. Javon flinched. I instinctively moved in front of him. Mr. Coleman, do you believe the system failed your client? Was Judge Delaney working alone? Do you plan to sue the state? What happens now? I raised a hand. The crowd didn't quiet because they respected me. They quieted because they could tell. I wasn't about to give them a soundbite. I was about to give them the truth. This isn't about one case, I said, my voice cutting clean through the chaos. It's about the cost of silence, the cost of unchecked power. My client didn't just survive a broken system. He was buried under it. Cameras zoomed in, pens scribbled. And Judge Frances Delaney didn't act in isolation. She was enabled, protected, applauded. While men like Javon were dragged through hell for the sake of efficiency and conviction rates, I let the silence settle. Then I added, this is not the end of the story. This is where it begins. Javon stood beside me, still quiet, still trying to understand what freedom felt like without fear attached to it. But when I glanced at him, I saw it. Just the flicker of fire returning to his eyes. That was enough for me. As I stepped away from the cameras, I noticed a small group gathered to the side. Faces I hadn't seen in years. Men and women who had once sat in Delaney's courtroom, each of them bruised, broken, and humiliated by her rulings. One man, graying at the temples, approached me first. I did 3 years for something I didn't do, he said quietly. I watched her smile when the verdict came down. And now, watching her get dragged out in cuffs. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. A woman in a worn denim jacket nodded toward Javon. He's not the only one you saved. I wanted to say I didn't save anyone. I wanted to say we shouldn't need saving from the system built to protect us. But I couldn't speak. Not then. Because for the first time in years, I felt something more than rage. I felt clarity. The next morning, I got a call from the State Judicial Oversight Committee. They wanted me to testify, formally. Not just about Delaney, but about the systemic failures I'd encountered. The cases, the patterns, the rot beneath the surface. I didn't hesitate. Send me the date. 2 days later, I stood before the committee. Microphones, suits, a row of officials who were either ready to listen or ready to pretend they had. I gave them names, numbers, transcripts, stories. I gave them hell. And when I finished, I said the one thing they couldn't write off as rhetoric. You don't fix a system by removing one bad actor. You fix it when you stop giving the next one cover. Some shifted in their seats. Others looked away, but 1 or 2 nodded, just barely. That was enough, for now. After the hearing, as I walked down those long marble steps alone, a reporter caught up to me. Not with a mic, but with a quiet voice. Mr. Coleman, she said, if you had one thing to say to the people who still believe the system works just fine, what would it be? I paused. Then I said it. It only works for you until it happens to you. She blinked. I walked on. Because I wasn't interested in being quoted. I was interested in being heard. In the system, it was next. In a world where justice often feels like a luxury instead of a right, the story of Javon Harris and Darius Coleman reminds us that silence is complicity and persistence is power. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a reckoning. A moment that exposed how a system, left unchecked, can become its own worst enemy. But more importantly, it showed us that systems only change when people inside them and outside of them refuse to look away. Today, too many still suffer in silence. Too many cases go unnoticed. Too many voices are dismissed before they even speak. And that's why stories like this matter, not because they're dramatic, but because they're possible. Let this be a reminder that justice doesn't begin in courtrooms. It begins with courage. This story is a fictional dramatization created solely for the purpose of entertainment and education. It is not intended to target, defame, or discriminate against any real individual, group, or institution. All characters and events are fictional or used fictitiously. If this story moved you, we invite you to leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, your truth, or simply your reaction. And if you believe in using stories to spark change, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support this ongoing mission for awareness and justice.